Cameras live.
Thank you, Ms. Legault. Welcome everyone to the Community Services Committee meeting of Thursday, November 12th, 2020. I would like to acknowledge that all of us somewhere are on the traditional territory of the Coast Salish people. And it's become customary as well to acknowledge the watershed that you are in. So I acknowledge the watershed of Shawnigan Lake. Ms. Legault, do we have approval of the agenda? Or I guess I did your job for you, sorry. Do we have approval of the agenda? Been moved, second. Any discussion? Seeing none. All in favor? Motion carries. Next, adoption of the minutes of September 9th, 2020. Do I have a mover? It's been moved. And second, any discussion? Seeing none. All in favor? Any opposed? Was that opposed, Director Nicholson? Or you just have the really good Wi-Fi? Okay. Motion carries. Any business arising from the minutes? Ms. Legault.
There is not.
Thank you. Is there also any public input?
I'm just double checking the inbox and I do not see anything for public input for Community Services Committee.
Thank you. And no delegations, no correspondence. Moving on to R1. Ms. Legault, would you like to read the recommendation?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Item R1 is a report from the Sport Tourism Event Grant Subcommittee regarding sport tourism event grant allocations, and the recommendation for consideration is that it be recommended to the board that the following sport tourism event grants totaling $16,000 be approved. There are 10 of them listed. Did you want me to read them?
I think that is fine. Are there any, do we have a mover? Been moved by Director Wilson, second by Director Stone. Any discussion? I have Director Morrison. Anyone else on the list? Okay, I'll put myself. Director Morrison, please.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Through you to Mr. Elzinga, just what's our standard caveat if the second wave doesn't go away and we can't have these things? How are we approaching that?
Mr. Elzinga.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Through to Director Morrison. So the caveat is that the funds will not be awarded unless we are certain the events will be moving forward. As per direction from the board at the last round, we only had one event go forward in the second half of this year. Potentially a second. We're still waiting for a disc golf event that may still happen at the hub, but most events have canceled and those funds have been transferred over to 2021.
Thank you. Any other questions? Director Nicholson.
Thank you. I was just wondering what Couch and Crusher Gravel Fondo was.
Through the chair to Director Nicholson, there's two cycling events that were on our list, the Burnt Bridge Fondo and the Couch and Crusher Fondo. My understanding is the Couch and Crusher Fondo did not go forward this year and is trying again next year, whereas the Burnt Bridge was able to move forward. So it's a cycling event. I believe it's in the Couch and Lake area.
Any other questions?
Thank you.
Oh. Director Salmon.
Yeah, thank you. So just to follow up on that first one about the funds that aren't being used transferred to 2021. So what's the mechanics of that? Does that mean that our 2021 budget showing less of a requisition requirement? Or does it go in reserve? Or
Mr. Elzinga, did you want to take that one?
Sure, I'll try, and maybe Ms. Weiner can help me out, or maybe Mr. Keeber as well. So there is actually surplus funds that will be reflected in function 121, economic development. So there will be less required for sport tourism next year. Of course, the board is interested in sections under function 121. So for the sport tourism section, less is required in 2021.
Thank you. And I recognize Director Sebring.
So just for clarity then, this total is $16,000, but some of that may be made up with funds that we didn't spend last year.
Mr. Elzinga?
Through the chair to Director Sebring. At this point, we have budgeted for a grant section 18,500 to transfer to next year. So obviously some funds were unrecoverable because they were already spent by events, especially in April or May. So at least 18,500 will be transferred over and used. So for this particular intake of the 16,000 suggested, it could all be paid for by 2020 funds.
Thank you. That's what I needed to hear. Okay.
We're ready to call the question. All in favor? Any opposed? Motion carries. Moving on to R2. Ms. Legault.
Thank you, Madam Chair. R2 is a report from the Facilities and Transit Division on the proposed 3-year transit expansion plan 2021-2022 to 2023-24. And the proposed recommendation is that it be recommended to the board, 1, that the 3-year transit expansion plan for 2021-22 and to 2023-24 outlined in BC Transit's letter of September 29th, 2020 be approved, subject to deferring 1,400 hours custom service expansion for basic Sunday service from July 2021 to July 2022. And 2, that transit service expansion hours and estimated associated costs for 2021-22 through 2023-24 be incorporated into the 5-year financial plan for transit budget functions 106 and 107.
Thank you. Do we have a mover? It's been moved. Is there a seconder? Okay. It's been seconded. Is there any discussion? I recognize Director Stone.
I'm not sure if Mr. Wakeham has got any presentation or anything for us, but after we saw the budget earlier today, I think we have a more focused discussion on transit budgets and how COVID's impacting it, and also the use of the funds transferred to local governments from the province via the federal government, because in both the federal and provincial releases, it says that those funds transferred to local governments will be used in part to offset losses within transit systems due to ridership declines and other costs in terms of, upgrading the buses for the protective shields and things like that. So I feel like we have an incomplete picture to be endorsing this transit expansion, which I am supportive of, without understanding how we're going to be using the COVID recovery funding to offset losses in the transit function.
Thank you. Mr. Wakeham, welcome.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Through to Director Stone. Great question, and this will be interesting because we do have our formal budget discussions on November the 25th. This particular issue is definitely related, and it's talking about expansion of custom. And so what we're suggesting in here is that we take a step back, and this is very difficult for staff to recommend, that we don't want to move forward with government funding on an initiative that was already approved by the committee to actually implement in 2020. But BC Transit is asking all local governments for any approved services that were in 2020 that were deferred to reconfirm if they choose to do so. So this is actually a deferral of only one item, the custom service. And the reasoning for that, it's kind of mentioned in the report. There's a number of initiatives we're going to have to take a really hard look at in the next year. And they're going to come into play further to the budget discussion. But to your point, Director Stone, I have not had an update from BC Transit. I know there's this significant amount of funding coming, and we're hopeful that we're going to have an answer by the end of December. When we present our budget to you, which you've already seen, which does have two substantial increases, mainly because of the decrease in fare revenue, but there's also a couple expansions or a couple expenses that have also gone to force that number to be higher than we desired. There will be a minor update. So in 2 weeks, staff is going to present to you. Remember, we had to do this budget a couple months ago, and we had to take our best estimate of what we felt our fares and ridership was going to be moving forward. And we don't have a significant change to it, but there will be some minor upgrades as we see that and I'm going to give you 3 numbers here because this is really pretty important. The conventional service right now, our ridership, which relates to fares, when we did the budget, we estimated a 50% decrease. As of last week, the decrease is only 45%. So there's a slight improvement in the last little while. When we talk about the commuter service going to Victoria, when the budget was done, we had a 75% decrease is what we were looking at over the last 4 or 5 months. It's improved a bit, and now we're sitting about 62 to 65. The worst, unfortunately, is custom service. When the budget was put forth, we were estimating a 75% decrease. And there's good reasons for that. I mean, this is really remembering the clientele we're dealing with here it's a mixture of real necessity day programs like dialysis that has to happen. And for the most part, Oak Transit, the custom service provider, is doing a really good job for that. But in speaking to them actually today, they were advising that some of the programs still have not opened up yet. A lot of them are non-essential trips that those clientele are not taking. Unfortunately, today, we're still down 71%. And so we're down about 70 to 65%, my mistake on that. So when we present the budget to you in 10 days, we will be showing you pretty much the worst case scenario without any revenue coming from the province or the feds. And that's because we didn't feel comfortable putting a number in there because we don't have anything. We've been told verbally, we've been told through an email that there will be assistance from the province coming. When I spoke to our senior regional transit manager that looks after our account, she said she's hopeful that we're going to have an answer by early January or late December. So I'm actually going to suggest to you when we discuss the budget meeting that we hold off making any significant changes until maybe January. What I'm going to suggest to you in 2 weeks, but I'm going to sort of let the cat out of the bag now, is if you really do want a zero tax increase, we will be looking at serious service changes. And one of the reasons why staff are recommending not to approve this custom service is because one of the recommendations we're going to do is to recommend removing conventional service on Sundays. And it's just one of a number of initiatives. We're going to be looking at reducing service or eliminating service on statutory holidays. We're going to be suggesting reducing the commuter service that goes to Victoria, maybe 1 or 2 trips. So there's going to be a whole series, a bit of a pecking order, if you will, that we're going to suggest could be initiatives that you guys could suggest you'd like to have staff put forth in order to get that service down. But I'm also hoping that we'll have an answer. I don't think we're going to have it in the next 10 days on what revenues we would expect. Hopefully that answers your question, Director Stone.
Thank you, Mr. Wakeham. Next, I recognize Director Wilson. Sorry, Director Sebring, do you have your hand up? Anyone else want to be on the list? Go ahead.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Sorry, I just realised I had my mic switched on all the time. I apologise for that. Yeah, thank you, Mr. Wakeham. That's very good. And I don't envy you the job that you're trying to get on with at the moment. It's a tough one considering everything that's going on. Most of the questions that I had have already been answered, but of course the big problem is, as you say, is the decreased ridership that we are talking about, and which we really don't know which way it's going to go. The same question will come up over and over again, which I've been asked, and I'm still being asked, why am I seeing empty buses? We know the answer to that one, but that question is going to come up more and more. And honestly, I don't know that there's a right answer to that one, but thank you for your presentation. I appreciate it.
Next, I recognize Director Sebring.
Thank you, Madam Chair. The only thing that, aside from what's already been addressed in terms of COVID and decreased ridership, something else jumped off the page at me as well in the main staff report. the second page, the first bullet, transit operations and maintenance facility, which became operational in March 2020, may require additional funds after operating for only 9 months. Can somebody explain what that's about? Did we not budget for that properly at the start, or is it more expensive to operate than we thought? Where would those additional funds be required?
Mr. Wakeham?
Madam Chair, through to Director Sebring, a very valid question. What I'm trying to say there is when we did the draft budget, we utilized the information BC Transit gave us on a budget that has not been updated. We have not even approved the annual operating agreement yet for the year that we're in the middle of, from April 1 of 2020 through to March of 2021. BC Transit tells us we will receive an annual operating agreement when they know what the province and the feds are going to be funding for us. So we're expecting to get an updated budget by the end of December. Once I get that budget, I will have a better understanding of if there's any additional funds required to operate that building. And it's like any new service that opens or new building, you're not 100% sure. I know the operator that's in there now has been operating it well. I haven't heard of any serious dollars that are required, but I throw that out there strictly for us to remember. We have a brand new building that's literally opened in March, and I don't know if there's going to be additional funds required or not to keep up the maintenance or operating and what that might be.
So basically on that one, we're flying by the seat of our pants until we get a year under our belt.
I think that's a fair comment, and at least until I get an update from BC Transit on their new budgets, which they're recommending.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Director Nicholson. And is there anyone after Director Nicholson to close? No.
Thank you, Mr. Wakeham. I am wondering, as you come back with questions about service and where the cut should be, what kind of input will you be bringing from the community that helps us understand the impact that this is going to have?
Mr. Wakeham, did you get enough of that question?
Yes, I think I did.
Thank you.
It's another very valid question. What's interesting is the Cowichan Valley's transit system is up for a refresher of our Transit Future Plan in 2021. So BC Transit is going to start an initiative, which we learned last week. It will take almost a full year. They're going to take, here's what the plan was. We've lived with it for 10 years now, or almost 10 years. And so we want to look at how we can modify it to create better service. With regard to the specific question of what are we going to do to cut service, and we're really talking about service cuts, this is the challenge we have. The challenge is in our Transit Future Plan, as well as our standards, the board approved that we will provide a minimum service to all areas. When we look at reducing services, no different than any other regions, we try to look at the routes and the services that have the least impact. Sometimes the least impact are the routes, sometimes that have the least ridership are the routes such as Eagle Heights. If we look at Eagle Heights, the ridership is not very good in that route. But if we reduce that, it would virtually wipe out that entire area's service. So staff are recommending we don't do that. We know where our stronger routes are. And so what we're recommending is routes like 2 and 3 that have pretty large quantities of trips during the day. Let's just say they have 10. We'd probably suggest let's go down to 7. And there's going to be impacts. These are all going to be tough decisions that both staff and directors are going to have to make. But I'll give you some examples of what we're thinking. Again, I think I might have mentioned this. We're thinking reducing service on Sunday. It's one of the lower impacts. When we reduce service on Saturday, that is a tough choice. It's easy to broadcast or educate the riders and the public, and it's easy to also advertise in the rider guide, no service on Saturdays. However, Saturdays are one of our biggest ridership days. So the only way we can present this to you based on dollars, and I know there's significance, they're in the hundreds of thousands of how much the taxes are going up. We have a couple initiatives that staff will put forth that have nothing directly related to buses on the road. One of them is a staff situation that I'll bring up to you in a couple of weeks. One of it is related to land acquisition that we're trying to work with BC Transit on for the commuter. But it's not going to be enough. If you really want to get it down substantially, we are going to be looking at cutting service pretty much in all areas. In other words, we're going to divide the pie up, if you will, or take the pie away from pretty much everybody as opposed to specifically targeting one or two areas. I'll give you another example. The UBO route, it's not very well utilized, but we have to provide service to some of those residents out there. If they only have 5 trips a day now, going down to 4 is not going to add enough reduction of dollars. We don't want to remove all the trips there. So we're likely going to be we're likely going to be recommending that we take away trips that have more volume. And that's going to be the heart of the Duncan and North Cowichan area as an example. But they're only going to be suggestions. We're going to try and put forth a couple items. Take away Sunday service with X amount of dollars. Take away Saturday service with X amount of dollars. Reduce service by, let's say, 15% overall. And it'll have a dollar sign attached to it. And we'll bring those back to you. It was not intended to go and have public input. We will not have time to do that. If you're looking for us to reduce our taxes that start on January 1, normally when you make a significant change to service, you need 3 to 5 months to educate the public on that.
Thank you, Mr. Wakeham. Then I recognize Director Stone. Is there anyone after Director Stone? Is that a yes, Director Morrison? Yes. Director Stone.
Thank you. So again, I'm just going through the release from just over a month ago from the province saying they're providing one-time operating grants to BC Transit partners in the order of $86 million for BC Transit. So you're saying that we'll find out about that funding in the end of December or the beginning of January?
Madam Chair, through to Director Stone, I believe some of that's already been taken into account. The province has already BC Transit has already advised us, and I took this into account when I drafted the budget. We are getting relief of the fleet lease fees. In other words, the loans, if you will, on the buses. And that is a significant savings. I've already taken that into consideration. What we're waiting to hear back on is how much revenue the province or the feds are going to provide to offset the lost fare revenue. So the budget, believe it or not, already has taken into account a significant savings in the lease fees.
Okay. It just, reading the documentation on the province's website, it speaks to the separate operational funding. So you're saying this operational funding is just being used to offset the bus leases?
Correct.
Wow. Okay, thank you.
Director Morrison.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And more of a comment and maybe planting a seed for when we have to have those further discussions. I think the resolution before us makes sense. And the seed that I want to plant is just of I've been here when we've had to reduce services to different routes in different areas, and it's definitely a sort of a gut-wrenching exercise, and I just want to raise this issue to the rest of the committee that the folks that are working 9 to 5 jobs or even shift work or in retail are some of the groups some of the folks that have had the most impact as a result of COVID. And one of the directors mentioned earlier about people selling their possessions on Barrage and the likes, and where we see that manifested in my communities are the second cars are on the side of the road with for sale signs on them, or the motorhomes or the boats. And normally those get snapped up pretty quick, but nobody's got any money and people are suffering. And if we're going to be positioned for recovery, people are going to have to be able to get to work, and we can't react spontaneously enough to be able to put services back in place. So I'm just going to suggest that over the next period of time that we're thinking about the cuts that may be put forward or put on the table, that any cuts that we make are disproportionately going to impact those people that we're going to need to work in our grocery stores and in the restaurants, and that are going to be the driver of our economic recovery. So, Mr. Wakeham, I know it's going to be a tough job to put those before us, but I'm suggesting we got to start thinking about this now, because people being able to get to work back and forth is going to be a really important part of us coming out of this as a community together. Thank you.
Mr. Wakeham?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Through to all the directors, Director Morrison, you are bang on. I'm reading a letter here that Minister Trevena sent out on May the 1st, and it's talking about how they understand the revenue and ridership has gone down and how they're trying to help mitigate the revenue shortfalls, and that's the number we're waiting to hear yet. But in the next paragraph, she talks about BC Transit exercising caution so as to not cut service below a point where those who rely on Travis the most for essential travel will be significantly impacted. This speaks to exactly Director Wilson's point. We may only have a bus with 3 or 5 people on it, but if you cut that service to those 3 or 5 that have to get to wherever their essential transportation might be, school, work, or other families, that's the tough decisions. And, you know, it's not just one route, it's all the routes that are affected. And it's so, you're right. This is a little bit premature, this discussion, but I know you just chatted about the budget just an hour or so ago. It's kind of a little bit interesting of the timing of this expansion is kind of setting the tone for what you're likely going to hear from myself in 2 weeks.
Okay, I think it's safe to call the question. I'll call the question. All those in favor? Any opposed? Motion carries. Thank you, Mr. Wakeham.
Thank
Ms.
you.
Legault.
Thank you, Madam Chair. No unfinished business or new business, so on to question period. And there are no submissions for question period.
Oh, phew. Those are always tough. Little test for the chair. Motion to adjourn. Been moved and second. All in favor? Motion carries. We'll see you in an hour.